Hi, Laura.
Hi,
Nice to see you.
it's great to be here. It's good to see you too.
Great. Today, my guest is Laura Albert. She's a professor and is the David H. Gustafson Department Chair of Industrial and Systems Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on discrete optimization with application to homeland security, emergency response, and cybersecurity. She has authored or co-authored more than 70 publications in archival journals and referred proceedings. She has been awarded many honors for her research. You can find a list in her Wikipedia page, a long list. She's a department editor for IISC Transaction and is on or has been on 6 other journal editorial boards. Laura has served on the Informs board as the vice president for marketing, communication, and outreach, and served as the assistant dean for graduate affairs in the College of Engineering at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Laura is, of course, the author of the famous blog, Punk Rock Operations Research. Well, Laura, I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. It's such an honor. How are you?
I'm good, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So let's start. You're from Illinois.
I am. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Chicago, so I don't live too far away right now. It's a great place to be raised, and I'm a proud Chicagoan, and I still follow a lot of the Chicago sports teams.
So I suspect you are a big fan of Chicago Bulls?
Absolutely. I feel like I was a bit spoiled to grow up with Michael Jordan. I don't actually remember basketball before Michael Jordan. And having the 6 championships in my youth was pretty special. It's been hard to be an NBA fan after that, but I'm a big fan of the Milwaukee Bucks. They
Mm,
sort of won me over these past few years, and it was really exciting to see them win the championship just
yeah, yeah,
recently.
yeah. Giannis did amazing and they won recently. Uh, I'm actually a Chicago Bulls fan too. Growing up also in the 80s and 90s. I remember when I was visiting the U.S. for the first time in about 1993. I was in a relative's house watching the final match in against the Phoenix Suns, and I clearly remember when John Paxson hit that clutch winning shot, and the Bulls won. It was amazing. Tell me about your family background.
Oh, sure. So I was raised by 2 parents. They both actually have a bit of a scientific background. My dad has a degree in biology. My mom had a degree in medical technology. And I have 2 siblings, a sister and a brother. I'm the first person to get a PhD in the family. And my mom, she didn't work in medical technology when I was growing up. She actually got a job at the school library, but she went back to school to pursue her dream of being a teacher. So she became a junior high science teacher. When I was in high school is when she got her first job in that area, and it was an she was inspiring. I mean, she really, wanted to work, but she also wanted to do something that was really fulfilling for her. And it definitely left an impression on me growing up, just seeing her work so hard for what she wanted, and my dad support her.
That is exactly what I was going to ask because when I was growing up, I was around 8. It's when my mom started doing her PhD. She started very late due to family reasons, and that is it. When you're a kid and you see your mom, studying and preparing for exams, it's funny in a way. Did you have the same impression?
Yeah, I mean, we loved it as kids when my mom would have her evening classes, and then we have spaghetti night, and it would always be a little bit special. She's still a great and devoted mom, and I could see that a lot of the other mothers weren't able to kind of to do all that, and but she was special in the way that she made time for all that and was able to find balance.
Wow. And your father also influenced you in being curious and so on. You were telling me the other day, right?
Yes, absolutely. I get his sense of curiosity. He's insanely curious. And so we'd often talk about things that he had read, things from books about science that he had read about, the latest scientific discoveries in the newspaper. It's really interesting. And I thought he was kind of a nerd when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, Dad's talking about science again. But I will tell you, the nut didn't fall very far from the tree. And now it is I who gets excited about scientific
Yeah.
discoveries and reads a lot of nonfiction books. And in that, it's just been interesting how much, his commitment to lifelong learning and on his own, mostly, is something that I feel very strongly about for me.
Yeah, I think growing up in such an interesting environment also helps you develop in general knowledge. As you said, not only about science, but also about other topics and literature and stuff like that. And it's I think it's really good for our background. Um, so, what are the best memories from your childhood?
Oh, there's a lot of memories from my childhood. I'll give you a couple. I always had my head in a book. I mean, really always. And so when I think back about to memories, it's always about, what books I was reading, and mostly, just fiction books. But I would always pack one with me. So if I ever got bored, I could read. And my mom was always amazed at how many books I could finish in a given week. So that's definitely a memory. And I still like reading.
Mm-hmm.
I was also very close to extended family members, especially my grandparents. And so I have a lot of memories of that. My dad's parents were immigrants, and only my grandmother was still alive. She's an immigrant from Scotland, and we were the only family in the neighborhood. And so she lived another 30 years past my grandfather, and we'd have to go visit her every week and do things to help take care of her. But then we also grew really, really close.
Mm-hmm.
I'd listen to her stories all the time, and she taught me how to make apple pie and scones and shortbread. And but I have a lot of really great memories of just being together and having that time together.
Great. Was she from Scotland?
Yeah, she was from outside of let's see, Glasgow, Scotland, and she
Mm-hmm.
came over when she was 19.
Oh, okay.
She came to America for better life. They just kind of needed some money, and her father had just died at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and arrived in the U.S. just in time for the Great Depression, and
Mm-hmm.
but was able to make it in America. And she married my grandfather, who's a German immigrant, and they had a great life together.
Mm. I see. Uh, well, moving on to high school, you had a pretty busy time.
I did. I came into my own and took advantage of my many other interests in addition to reading, which I still did a lot of reading. But I took advantage of a lot of different activities: Scholastic Bowl, Science Bowl, marching band, as well as sports. So I played volleyball, ran cross country, and played badminton. So I was very, very active. Learned a lot about time management, and it just was a pretty fulfilling and good time in my life where I got to be more independent and really explore what interested me. And the bar is pretty low in high school, at least where I went to school, that you could just easily try new things, and
Wow.
it was good.
Wow. You were mentioning that you were playing in a marching band. What instrument did you play?
I played the trumpet, which was interesting because I was so painfully shy at the time, and I played this loud brass instrument. Um, but it suited me pretty well, and I liked marching band. That in addition to the music, there's formations, there's a performance aspect to it,
Why?
and
Yeah.
it just really engages the mind in so many different ways, as well as the body to do the performances. And
Yeah.
for me, I mean, that was like the best way to have band.
Yeah. You should be all in sync. Not only everybody playing correctly in tune, but also you have to march and do all those moves and perform as you
Mhm.
said. It should have been difficult, but at the same time, I assume you really had fun because once you get the knack of it, I think it's you learn to enjoy the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned that you play so many sports. Did you play in any tournaments, in like state level or regional level in one of those sports?
Yeah, I mean, I took all the athletics seriously, but badminton is where I really was able to shine. I just really took a liking to it. I never had really been exposed to it. I played the top spot in my high school for 3 years in both singles and doubles. And it was just such a great, like, it just was such a great experience. It was very much a melting pot of different students. It was many were not the typical students drawn to sports, and
Uh-huh.
meant somewhere. And there was there's a little bit more variety in terms of the life experiences on the team as with other sports I played. And I did make the state tournament 3 times in high school. And yeah, I mean, I really lived for sports, even more than academics in high school.
That's very, very impressive. I think you even won a Scholar Athletic Award uh, because of your
Yeah,
dedication to all of that.
exactly. So my high school had an award for seniors, and it was the Scholar Athlete Award, as you as you noted, for it was really an academic award and being able to make do so well in academics in addition to athletics.
So you never consider trying to be reaching a professional level or something like that, or doing a physical education major? Never came into your mind.
No, it never did. And even when I went to college, I knew I just did not want to do collegiate sports. Not because I didn't love it. I really liked the idea of it. It just felt like I really wanted to switch to um, academic pursuits and let that very curious part of me explore the things that I wanted to explore. And I knew going to college that there would always be time for athletics just for fun
Yeah.
and that could be really fulfilling. So I knew it would be still be part of my life.
At the same time, more or less, is when you discover your math ability somehow.
Yeah, in high school, I finally accepted it. I could tell all along from elementary school that math came really easy to me. And it wasn't always taught very well in school at that time in the United States. And
Oh.
so, unfortunately, like, your natural abilities kind of meant a lot. And I'm glad that that's changed in the US. They do a much better job of sort of bringing everybody up to speed. Um, so in high school, though, there were a lot of really smart people in high school, and I felt like I was good but not great. And at one point there was a test, I don't know what it was called, but it was kind of standardized test that you could take for fun, and I did that a few times in high school. In my junior and senior year, I think I finished really well. I got very high scores both years and finished like maybe second in the school, and it was quite a shock to me to be that far of an outlier. And it was confidence building for sure. Um,
Yeah, I had a
so
similar experience when there was a test involving chess. And I remember I did the second best scoring in the school, and I had no idea. I had this slight ability to play chess. Of course, I never reached a very high level, but I could compete against other schools and win a couple of tournaments, not as an individual player, but as a team. So it's I think I can relate more or less to what you're saying. But then there is a thing called jets.
yes.
That's very special in your life, and I would like very much to hear about that.
Yeah, I look back in my career and I'm a full professor in engineering, and I wonder how I got to this point because I had all these opportunities in life to not get to this point, and it
Exactly.
seemed like I went down all of those paths to like not bring me here. And I think about what were like these important milestones that really gave me the confidence or the opportunity to go to the next level. And one was JETS, which stands for Junior Engineering Technical Society. And it's kind of like a big science competition for high schools. And my high school was starting one, and they asked me to compete for the team, and I could participate in 2 subjects, and they asked me to participate in physics and chemistry. And I said yes. And so I spent like my entire winter break, my senior year, studying physics and chemistry to do well in these tests. And so then I participated, and just our first meet, I ended up getting like second in chemistry. Um, and that was pretty good. And then we went on to the regional meet. We didn't go any further than that, but it was a really nice experience, mainly because the teachers starting the club really put their confidence in me that they knew that I could do it. There would only be like 1 or 2 people on the team participating in the subjects. And so they singled me out as like the one. And that was just incredibly confidence building because when I thought of a scientist when I was a kid, I did not think of somebody who looked like me. I thought of all the stereotypes, of course, and
Sure.
I work hard to change those now. But that it was a great experience. One of the memories that really stands out is this activity they gave us based on engineering, and it was based on environmental engineering because they had to grade this and score all the tests when we took them, but to determine who was the winner, and that took a little bit of time. So they gave us this group activity on environmental engineering, and it was like very much an applied problem that we needed to think through and draw from different fields. And I remember not knowing how to solve any of it, of course, and not everybody was like helping me out on the team, but it was just like the problem was so interesting. I'm like, wow, engineers do really cool things. And I remember when I had to do an interview for one of my college applications, I had already mentioned that I was getting an interest in engineering, but when I applied to college, I applied as a history major. So maybe that's a source of another discussion.
Wow. Maybe because you have so many abilities, it was really hard to find a career. I think of people that they have no idea what to do because they feel they're not good in anything. I think you had, in your case, it was quite the opposite. I think you kind of felt, because you went on building your confidence, especially through high school, that it came to a point that you could basically go to arts, sciences, and engineering. You had this multitasking profile, if you will. So Laura, you were mentioning that you spent the winter break, preparing for the competition and so on. Do you think you have a competitive nature?
Yes, I'm competitive, but mostly just with myself. And I wanted to do the best that I could for me to build my own confidence. And I'm still very competitive now. Most of the time, it's when I run races, always want to set my personal best. I can't control the other runners that are at races,
Sure.
but I want to always be improving.
Yeah. And you were saying that you originally applied for a major in history, but then you changed your mind after the application and you went on and switched to a different degree. Tell me
Mhm.
more about that.
I changed my mind so many different times. You're right. I had trouble deciding on what I wanted to do. I'm just so curious, and there's so much I wanted to learn about. And it took a while for me to decide. So I applied to college as a history major. I liked history, was thinking about a legal career. Even before I started, I was already changing my mind. So when I started as a freshman in college, was already double majoring in physics and history. Then it was physics and the history and philosophy of science. I mixed some philosophy in
Philosophy,
there.
yeah.
And then after my first year, I just went into engineering, and that's where I've been.
Yeah.
I still did some history and philosophy of science courses, and I just finished reading a philosophy book last week. So not much has changed, but I've definitely found some focus.
Yeah, so the transition was actually smooth when switching majors. And at that time, you were really confident when you took the decision, right?
No, but I was
Oh,
not confident. I was always second guessing myself a little bit. Still kind of deciding, what I want my career path to be. And I recently have been pursuing academic leadership opportunities, and my department chair right now. So I think there's still a chance to retool a little bit along the way. It's funny because when I talk to high school students thinking about coming to engineering here, the number one question they ask me is along the lines of like, what if I veer from this really narrow path? I'm not going to make it as an engineer. And I'm always very open about how lost I was at the beginning of my academic journey, and it turned out okay. The path is usually pretty forgiving, and it was for me, and I think it is for a lot of other people.
yeah, that's very nice for you to acknowledge that. It will certainly inspire many other people. Um, and then you were now studying engineering and industrial engineering, and you have to at some point learn how to code. That's yet another barrier for so many students, especially industrial engineering students. And how was it in your case?
Well, I started coding on my calculator in high school just because one of my friends knew how to do that and was making games. And I just sort of learned by observing a little bit, but it was very basic. So that was not going to take me far, but it was helpful. And then I took a class in C, programming in C in college, and they taught that pretty well, and that was helpful. And when I started taking engineering classes, they used MATLAB a lot because it has a lot of built-in functionality. And over time, those courses would require more and more programming, not just figuring out the commands in MATLAB and running it on the command line. And at least at my university, they expected engineers to program. And one of the courses I took early in grad school was just, we're all going to program in C++, figure it out. And so I did. And now I know C++.
And what about your
Um,
classmates and colleagues? Were they really enthusiastic as you were?
Industrial engineers are typically not as enthusiastic, but in general, is a place where there was a lot of computing going on, and there was a lot of buy-in because that just like is what you need to do to get things done. Um,
Yeah,
we managed.
right. And how many women were there in your class?
Oh, not nearly enough. I was the only woman in a couple of my courses. So that was not great. They weren't huge courses, but sometimes I would take some and it would be about 5% in a big course, and that was a little discouraging. The most discouraging thing was the lack of female professors, because if you're really looking out in what you want your career to be, and you're looking at these role models, and there were very few, and of course what they did was so important. But I only had one female professor as
Wow.
an undergraduate student in engineering. So I had a few other female professors and some TAs that were women, but just the one as a professor, and definitely left a mark. And I really struggled with you know being ambitious about my career path because I just didn't really see that.
Hmm. But at that point, you were not really interested in following an academic career, uh, right?
That's true. I was painfully shy, as I mentioned earlier, and just the thought of even, defending a dissertation was terrifying to me, and teaching in front of a class every semester, no way. But, we all can grow and change, and I grew and changed and adapted, and now I really enjoy teaching. I like doing interviews and being on camera even.
Yeah,
So, you never know what could be in store for you.
exactly. Exactly. I agree. Uh, you mentioned that there were very few women around. Did you have any sort of a group or even a mailing list or something like that?
Definitely. I was involved in the university program, Women in Engineering, that was run at the college. I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and they were making some efforts to diversify the student body and to make sure we succeeded. And I really liked the Women in Engineering group. First of all, there was a woman professor that ran it, and she was really fantastic. And they would bring in these speakers that were usually, women who had graduated from the program, and it was so inspiring to hear from them, because then I could start to see my path, and some of those talks were very memorable. And then you're right, there was a mailing list, and that is how I ended up getting an internship when I was in college. But there was a job at the supercomputing center with SGI. So formerly SGI at one point stood for Silicon Graphics Inc., and they bought the company that made the supercomputers. And they put this ad in the Women in Engineering mailing list, like no experience necessary, just has to be willing to learn about parallel computing and supercomputing, and I just decided to apply. I don't know why. In part because like you could just do it on campus during the semester, and I thought, oh my God, I think I can balance that. I'm used to juggling a lot, and it, the way that they wrote the ad, I don't remember what was in it, but I remember it was very inviting, so I
Wow.
applied.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that position was actually a bit unusual for an industrial engineer. But
yes,
yeah,
it was. And I figured if they didn't have to give me the job, if they didn't want an industrial engineer. So, but I did end up getting hired as an intern.
right. And what did you learn there? What did you do?
I mean, the best thing was the things I didn't specifically learn about the job. What was really cool about the position was I worked closely with these two staff members, mostly the one who had a PhD in mechanical engineering and just did a lot of, hardcore scientific computing and, his research, and then later in his career. And he basically helped all of the scientists and faculty and postdocs and everybody on this big scientific research enterprise run all of their code on these computers. And so I got to see all of that and learn a little bit about what a PhD does in industry, which is what I really wanted to do because I didn't want to go into academia.
Uh-huh.
And I'm so glad I changed my mind about that. But then I got to see things behind the scenes, and that was so fascinating, just seeing what researchers did. I even met some of the students I knew in my classes who were undergraduate researchers. And then I remember one showing me this work she was doing in graphics, and it was, you needed a lot of computing to do like these very detailed graphics that at the time were very state of the art. And it was just so fascinating to see all that and see people that looked, like me and like a lot of other people taking taking part in science and engineering research behind the scenes. That really helped me grow my confidence that grad school and a PhD was right for me. But in terms of the job, I had to learn about like parallel computing, and they signed me up for some courses. And undergraduates typically do not know about these subjects, so I think anybody in the role would have to learn a little bit. And I learned about that, and had a great time with my internship. And I should say that my boss, KV, was like really fantastic and patient and kind, and that made a big difference too. So anybody who mentors students can really make a difference for them.
Right. So you were coding in shell scripts or any other type of, or were you writing any other type of programs? What did you do basically?
Yeah, I did some programming in shell scripts. I think it was C shell. That's what they were using there, just to kind of test things out, because they would get questions from people running code, like things aren't working, or how do I get this done? And so a lot of it was these shell scripts that would run all this other code that might be like 90% of it was in Fortran at the time. So I would do some shell scripts. And one of the issues that came up with was like one of the CPUs had like 2 nodes on them, and one of them went bad at one point. And I guess maybe this should never happen. It should never go bad, but they had a problem with that. And they wanted me, and so then they get complaints from the scientists that there's something wrong with the computers. This was a common complaint. Like, my code didn't run, there's something wrong with those computers. And so I worked on trying to isolate where the computations were sent. And I used somebody else's Fortran code that basically did a lot of linear algebra, but on a large scale. And so you did all these computations, and then something would go wrong with the node, and then the right numbers wouldn't come back. And if you do that enough, then you can really identify that this is the wrong answer. So we'd run that. We knew what the right answer was. And then the trick was, with the shell script, is forcing it to run on specific nodes one at a time. And then you could iterate through and test everything. But the default setting was that it would not really obey the command. It would sort of override and optimize where it would run the code. And so I had to kind of figure out how to force it to do what we wanted so we could test things out. And that was one of the projects I worked on.
Yeah. I assume you learned quite a lot. And by listening to your memories from that period, it seems that the environment and all the experience and the feeling of belonging to a place was perhaps equally important as the technical abilities and the jobs that you had to do it at the time. So the combo, if you will, really made a difference. And sometimes when you do an internship, you don't find that correct environment, or there is a good environment, but you don't like what you're doing. So I think in your case, it turned out really well. But we didn't talk about OR so far. And was it love at first sight when you first came across?
I would say love at second sight.
Ah.
I took an OR course as an undergraduate, and it was fine. But the situation was a little tumultuous with the instructor at that time. They had to switch instructors, so it wasn't like a really great environment to develop this love of OR. But I do vividly remember the explanation of how the simplex algorithm works, and man, that is really cool. But it was love at second sight when I later took a design optimization course that did OR, but it was ultimately just learning about a lot of nonlinear optimization and implementing the algorithms of steepest descent and some other things that I really developed a love for OR, and in particular optimization. I mean, it's just so unbelievably cool. And just to have this problem where you have multiple variables, you want to change them all at once, and you have algorithms that can do it reliably. We weren't always using algorithms that were guaranteed to find optimality in that course, but it was just really amazing to actually do the programming, put problems in, get solutions that were optimal. And then, of course, it's fun to do the problems where you don't get the optimal solution and you got to see what goes wrong. It was just really fun to get really involved in that level of kind of the theory, but also just doing it with programming and seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, I heard similar stories. It seems like when we get infected by the OR, virus or something like that, it's hard to get healed, and you become literally an optimizer, and that stays in you, and somehow even affects our everyday life and everyday thinking. Did something happen to you like that?
Yes, absolutely. I was actually interviewed for a popular science book about how I use OR in my everyday life, and I'm always trying to find my shortest path. Um, and I use project management. I guess you find your longest path there because that's your critical path,
Yeah.
and I try to balance that. And even to get my kids out the door in the morning, I'm always trying to figure out what's on the critical path. They're older now, but when they were little, it was really hard to just get three kids out of the house to
Yeah,
school in the
sure.
mornings. And I often, what I remember, just to get out of the house, you have to give them breakfast, and sometimes you just have to remember to give them a spoon because otherwise they're sort of waiting to to do that next step. And then so there's just me going around tending to all the items on the critical path.
Yeah. So after that love at second sight, it's when you decided that you were going to do masters in optimization.
Yes, and so that's what I did. I stuck around for a master's degree and found a professor to work with on and who studied genetic algorithms, and that seemed right up my alley because at the time, I mean, artificial intelligence was not a cool term at the time, so people didn't use it. It has had some ups and downs, but it was just really cool that you could, solve problems in this way. And it was being used to solve some very difficult to solve problems, mostly in engineering, design optimization and other topics. And this particular professor really studied how the algorithms worked and how they found the solutions that they did and how we could do that better.
Right.
And so my master's thesis really studies that type of problem. It was kind of made up problems and numerical optimization that represented like these engineering challenges, but we really studied the question of what if you have a fixed amount of computation time, how would you use that intelligently to solve a problem? And the idea was that based on how the algorithm works, you converge to different parts of the solution at different times. And some parts are very easy to converge to, but if you just naively apply the algorithm, you do a lot of computation the whole way through, but that can be very inefficient and doesn't scale very well to certain applications.
Right. And this is again not very typical for someone coming from an industrial and engineering background. And that's a bit unusual. And I think your second internship also was a bit unusual. Can you tell me more
Oh,
about
yes.
that?
Well, I started my master's, and it was pretty clear that I really liked research and wanted to do more research, and a PhD was right for me. But I didn't want to go into academia yet. So I wanted to get an internship at a company where there were many PhDs working in industry, so I would get a sense of what that life would be like. So those were my constraints. And I found an internship with the defense contractor SAIC in one of their offices. They did a lot of defense work, and it was basically applied electrical engineering. And they were developing all this software that would, apply a lot of electrical engineering principles to imaging that would be like collected by radar or some other signaling technology. And they had people from a variety of backgrounds at the company because there was a lot of software involved. And it was just a really great opportunity to kind of get to know some of the people with PhDs there. And then I could see who led the software projects. I could see who, did all sorts of different things there. And it really made me convinced that I needed to get a PhD because it might lead to the types of industry jobs that I would find fulfilling.
Right. Uh, so you started your PhD on September 1st, 2001 on aviation security. And that's the perfect definition of timing.
All credit goes to Sheldon Jacobson, my advisor, who had been working on that area for years. Just his sense was that that was a really important problem. The world just hadn't figured it out yet. He figured it out in about 1996. So just a great vision for what are the important research problems we need to address as a community.
Right. I know it's a bit of cliche to ask that, but where were you on 9/11?
I was actually in my research lab, um, and I got there really early that morning. I was a bit of an early riser and got the alert. And I just signed up for some like news alerts in my email, and I got this unbelievable headline. That was the first news alert I ever got in my email. And I'm
Wow.
like, clearly this is a spam email that could not have happened. And I went online and I couldn't, all the websites were down. You couldn't access that information. And so, we had the radio on, and I just had to go home. And of course, then I watched like news coverage all day, and that was a little overwhelming, but it was a pretty overwhelming time.
Yeah, yeah. I also remember, I saw actually the second uh, airplane hitting the World Trade Center live, and that was absolutely shocking and horrible. And yeah, oof. I can only imagine for you guys, living there, and you know, and did that make you feel, really uncomfortable for several weeks, months, or you quickly recovered from the shock?
I mean, I did recover from the shock. I didn't have any personal connections to it, but the part that didn't recover is I just wanted to do something and make a difference and try to make the world safer. And the research was such a great opportunity for that. I figured that I would be interested in theory because I was good at math. I was insanely curious. I loved abstract thought. Why not?
Hmm.
And I switched to applied research and sort of, I've never looked back.
Yeah.
But I still am really drawn to applications that can really make a difference, that kind of bridge theory to application, to policy often.
Mhm.
And the research really kept me going. But even at the time, it was not obvious to me that operations research was a really great tool for this problem. And that was one thing that I had to learn,
Mhm.
is to kind of see the potential in operations research and in our discipline, in its ability to really address some of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, sometimes we think that something complex is really relevant, but uh, at times when you see the opportunity and you can identify the potential application of a tool, and that is not obvious at times, and I think it deserves credit in a way, because you might have to think in a creative fashion. It's not only a matter of implementing complex algorithms and all that. You have to see, this is useful in that context, and I think in this case, you and your advisor really accomplished a really important thing. And I would like to hear very much about your PhD research.
Oh, sure. So my PhD research was driven by some questions that actually were originated before September 11th. And because aviation security was secretly in a state of flux prior to September 11th, in that there was more advanced screening being done for some checked bags, not just the checked bag. So it would not have made a difference in September 11th. But the idea was they have a very budget constrained environment and they want to get the most use out of their limited screening technologies. And when they introduce them, they can only, do the advanced screening for maybe 5% of passengers. And so the questions they had were, basically, how do they effectively implement risk-based screening in these budget-constrained environments? And so we looked at that a couple of different ways. First, in terms of, how much difference will this make in terms of, just reducing the risk with these costs? And then we looked at it in terms of actual devices and assigning people to a subset of devices, so you get a bit of a set covering problem in there, and how can you manage that? And then we switched to the dynamic version of the problem, whereas like once we've committed to these screening capacities and different like screening groups, how do you assign people in real time, and is that robust? And the results suggested that this can reduce the risk substantially because you target your limited resources on the riskier parts of the system. And in that application, it was very reasonable to assume that most passengers were low risk. The Federal Aviation Administration, which is now part of the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, had been doing some kind of risk assessments, and most people are not risky, and it's pretty obvious.
Hmm.
And so they were able to help defeat some of these assumptions for the work, and we got some of these policy insights back. And
Hmm.
then it looked like you could develop a tool to make assignments to passengers that would lead to them using their devices in kind of responsible ways that wouldn't lead to long waits at the airport. Um,
Right. And can we say that the research you developed during your PhD, or all these advances in OR in aviation security, has been put into practice?
yes, I can, and I'm happy to say that, but it took some time. I remember at one point, I thought some of my research was going to be presented to the TSA and it would make a difference, and it seemed like we had these connections, and then nothing happened. And then nothing happened for a long time. I kept reading about these like pilot projects the TSA was going to start that sounded like my research, risk-based security, but then it did nothing happened. And then through some luck, Ken Fletcher, who is an OR person, discovered our research and later became the architect of TSA PreCheck. Afterward, we found out that they considered what looks like TSA PreCheck, which looks a lot like the papers I wrote. And we found out a couple things. One is my research papers did help them do the analysis. So they plugged in their numbers and did a little bit more with it, but it provided a framework and the technical justification for something like TSA PreCheck. We also found out they were considering two other alternatives to TSA PreCheck, and they had to choose between the three, and they chose TSA PreCheck. So that was kind of lucky, but if you do good work and there's a little bit of luck, sometimes you can make a big difference.
Yeah, you gotta have luck at some point. It's
Yes.
yeah, that's how it is. Uh, and you mentioned about your papers and so on. I usually ask the guests what are their first conference and journal papers, and how was the experience, and in your case, how did it go?
Sure. I will talk about my first OR conference. It's not my first conference, but it's very memorable. And I went to my first OR conference, and having been to conferences before, I was used to sort of standing out as a woman and not always feeling like I really belonged. And I had quite a different experience at my first OR conference, in part because the women in OR and MS, WORMS, which is one of the fora of Informs, started a lunch just for women. And Panara Keshinocek, who's the past president of Informs and a professor at Georgia Tech, started that. And it was just such an important moment in the conference. I mean, I presented research, but I really remember this lunch. And the lunch was so memorable because I literally and figuratively felt welcome to the table in our community. And it's really inspired me so much when I think about it, because I feel obligated to make places where other people feel included and valued wherever I go. And people that look like me need to be welcome to the field, but people who don't look like me, who've been historically excluded, also need to be welcome to the field. And kind of it's up to all of us to do the welcoming.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And what about your first journal paper?
Oh, I should know this more memorably, but I do remember the first paper that I authored, where I was the first author, and that was pretty thrilling because it was not accepted at the first journal, and it was a little bit demoralizing. But it was the first aviation security paper, was accepted in Naval Research Logistics.
Which is a really good journal and traditional journal. Did you tell your mom or anyone from your family? Because sometimes when you get the first paper is a big thing, or you didn't really make a big deal out of it.
I didn't make a huge deal out of it. I'm sure I told my mom, and my mom's proud of me, of course, and my dad too. But yeah, it was kind of demoralizing that it just took so long. And then I had many other papers quickly followed. But it kind of was a sense of relief when it finally was accepted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see that in a way as maybe your first child, but or academic child. But then you also had your first child, your first kid during the graduate school. Your first daughter was born.
I did. I have three daughters. My oldest was born when I was a graduate student, and I was done with courses at that time. And yeah, I mean, she's wonderful. I'm so glad she's part of my life. It was a little crazy to have a child before the PhD, but it was also good too. I mean, I ended up having three daughters all before I went up for tenure. So I've kind of never known another part of my career where I didn't have young children. And
Right.
I don't know, maybe it's easier that way to not have to make a big change.
And your advisor, he was supportive, I believe, right?
Yes, he's incredibly supportive. So many universities, and mine at the time, didn't have a parental leave program. So he was incredibly supportive. And yeah, I can't say enough about that.
Yeah. And eventually you graduated and you got your first position in a university. Can you tell me more about that too?
Yep, I went straight to a faculty position at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Statistics and Operations Research Department. And that was an exciting time and a great place to start my career. And I made a lot of great connections with my colleagues there and learned how to teach. And so I did figure out that I needed to go into this academic job, and I was ready for it when it began.
And Do you have any recollections of the first time you joined the classroom and was there as assistant professor and having the, that so many, I don't know how many people were there, but standing in front of so many people and talking and being in that position, was it smooth or were you nervous?
It was pretty smooth. I think like a lot of, but I was nervous. I was definitely nervous. And I was able to teach a course as a graduate student. My department had a fellowship that you could just teach an entire course. And so I taught an engineering statistics course to 69 students, and that was terrifying. I'd just go in with a sweat every class that I taught, and the students wrote in the evaluations I should be more confident about my answers and everything. But I learned and I grew as an instructor, and it just got easier each semester I taught.
Excellent. Yeah, it's good for you to acknowledge that in the beginning it was you have that little bit of insecurity, but you thrived, and it shows that with some bit of confidence and thinking straight, you can achieve a really good result in that matter. Because I know some people that coming that transition from being a PhD student or even a postdoc, and then they start teaching, and they get excited, they have a position, but still it makes them feel uneasy or uncomfortable at times. So it's good to hear that in your case was smooth, yet you were nervous and all these things that we can feel during that time.
Yeah, we're all a work in progress, and I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we all are going to grow. We have this growth mindset for our students. We know they can learn, but sometimes we forget to have that same mindset for ourselves.
Exactly.
And there's so much professors have to learn in 5 or 6 years before they go up to tenure, and they will learn a lot. And just to be patient, keep working at it, and a lot of things can get ironed out in that time.
So Laura, you were a single mom with 3 daughters, and yet you were certainly an accomplisher in your professional life. And how do you do the magic of time management? I know you give a lot of talks about that, and you have even a presentation available on YouTube regarding that.
Yes, I do.
You made some posts on Twitter and even your blog. But I want to hear straight from you now. How do you do that? It's just unbelievable.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that I could say on it. But first and foremost, I learned a lot in high school, and mainly because I wanted to pursue my interests. And I think, living a life of passion is good, and that there's things that you want to make time for, and that makes it all worthwhile. And so that is, I think, one of my core principles is in terms of finding the balance is that you have to make time for the fun stuff. And of course, the things you have to do need to be worked in there. But, sometimes the fun stuff makes it all worthwhile. So in terms of balance with the kids and the tenure track, I mean, it is a little tricky. I mean, Little's Law helps, some queuing theory in terms of making progress on those papers that need to go through. And you have to juggle a lot of papers at various stages of the publication process to have, a great dossier when you up for tenure. But a lot of it is just figuring out how I work well, getting things done in short bursts is very good. And I keep reading papers on why that's good. And sometimes it felt like I just developed that out of necessity with these young children. Sometimes you only have half an hour, but just being able to kind of chip away at things when you can, but on a regular basis can be really good. In terms of time management, I make a to-do list of every day when I start my day. So that's just part of my morning ritual. But it starts really before that on a weekly basis. On Sunday nights, I often look at my schedule for the week, and I get a sense for what my daily to-do list will be. But then I look for periods when I can block off some time for research. And sometimes I'll actually do that. I'll block off my calendar for that so it doesn't get filled with meetings and other things that can be distracting. So I kind of on a global level, I try to get the right mix each week. And then I have my daily to-do list. And and then I just try to be mindful of how long it takes to get things done. Sometimes you have a feedback loop and you realize those things in your to-do list are still there day after day. So either I'm not devoting enough time or they just took longer than I thought, and I'll adjust time later.
Yeah. Wow, that's very impressive.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you have to juggle quite a lot. So let me ask you this nerd question. How do you handle hard and soft constraints?
That's a really good question. Um, yeah, so my hard constraints is I try to get 8 hours of sleep every night and get some exercise every day. Sometimes I make time for more than that. So that's just what I need to do for me as a human being. And then you work around your other hard constraints like teaching and whatnot. My children's schedule. So I have a lot of hard constraints because my children's schedule really dictates a lot. And then there's the soft constraints, which is usually when I get the exercise. So I would say what's missing from your question is what are your variables?
Oh, yeah.
And a big aspect of my time management is not what to do, it's when I do it.
Oh,
And a lot of times I hear people ask me about time management and they think the right question is, do I say yes to this or do I say no to this? And my answer is like, it's way more complicated than that. But sometimes you have to figure out when you can do it and that affects your answer. And for me, that's totally true. So my daughters have Irish dance practice. I go running that hour and that's when I get my exercise in. So I have to be very flexible and have those soft constraints in there to make it all work. And having a flexible mindset is, I think, critical.
yeah. So you literally optimize your schedule, and maybe you can profit from your our abilities to do that.
That's true, but I secretly hope people have a little bit more freedom in setting their schedules than sometimes I do. But if I'm willing to be flexible, I can find a very high quality solution.
Yes, and after spending many years in Virginia, you decided to switch universities, and why?
For a couple of reasons. One is Virginia Commonwealth University is fantastic. I was in a great department with great colleagues, but it was in a liberal arts and colleges, liberal arts and sciences college, and we had limited opportunity to really mentor students. We did start a PhD program while I was there, but when I looked forward at what kind of impact I wanted my career to have, it was clear that I needed to be in College of Engineering. And I wanted to go to only one of the best universities. So I interviewed at several places and decided to come to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is, close to where I grew up and close to family. So that was a big selling point.
I see. We have to talk about the famous punk rock OR blog. Tell me everything about it, and first tell me about the name. Why?
Sure, I will. So I started it my first year as a faculty member and was in the small program, stats and OR program. There weren't a lot of students in it, but when they discovered OR, they liked it. So I felt like there was a story to tell there. And blogging was cool at the time. It's no longer cool, but whatever. I just love it. I think blogging is great because you can introduce so much content. But I started this blog really thinking like, oh, students will discover operations research as a major, and this will be great. So it didn't really work that way. We can talk about that later, but it's been very successful. And when I started the blog, I had to come up with a name, and my favorite blog was Mike Trick's Operations Research blog, and best blog. But I felt like the name was a little lacking, and I've given Mike a hard time about this, but I just had a different vision for my blog's name. Maybe our visions for the actual blog are similar, but I tried out a bunch of different names, and I really liked punk rock operations research. I just something that really stuck. Once I thought of it, I knew that was the blog's name.
Right.
And I like punk. I like a lot of other music too, but I like the DIY aspect of punk. It was very do-it-yourself. It's break the rules. It's envision things being done in ways they haven't been done before. Some punk is really looks at society and is really critical of society. Some music I like by The Clash and some other artists really, envision a better world. And it just seemed to really fit. Maybe it's not perfect, but it fit enough for me. And I have no regrets.
Yeah, I must confess that I'm more into classic rock or prog rock, even hard rock. But punk rock is really okay for this. I mean, you nailed it. I can say that
Thank you.
it really reflects the idea and so on. So it's a very good name. And what were the main benefits you got from your blog? And do you get recognized in person when going to conferences because of the blog?
Yes, I do. It's really weird, but I will say that I'm often asked about this. Like, what a colossal waste of time to start a blog and write a blog on the tenure track. You have so many other things to do. But as I said, you have to live a life full of passion. You have to have fun on the tenure track. Otherwise, it's just a grind. I mean, and you have to be doing the job after tenure. So you have to make it sustainable for the long term. So for me, I mean, that's part of the benefit. I also think the benefit was something that I wanted to do. I really like the idea of writing, and as somebody that's quite introverted, I'm less introverted than I used to be, but blogging is a great medium for an introvert to get your message out to the world. And it really felt important to me, especially with the type of applied research that I did when I was a PhD student, to tell our story to the greater audience and whoever's out there listening, which is usually not like the entire general public, but it's people that are interested in kind of science and math in general. And we've got a great story to tell, and operations research shouldn't be such a well-kept secret.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you think I'll get back to that later about being a secret society, but you've been maintaining this blog for about 15 years or so, right? And you once told me that the more I post, the more I think of more things to post. Is it how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Like once you start being creative and blogging about something, it's really easy to stay in that creative mode and to come up with more ideas. And it's really good for my brain to just think about things to post, because sometimes I don't get to go in all these different directions in my research, but I can do that with the blog. And so that's been good for me. It's made me a better writer as well. Just being able to explain something that's really not obvious and really cool about operations research to other people in other disciplines. I think that's been really helpful in terms of just improving my ability to teach.
Yeah, and it's also sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and then you asked earlier about some of the other benefits. I found that some of my colleagues use my posts in their classrooms. People get to know me. I've discovered students that have chosen to switch majors and become into operations research or pursue it in their PhD. Those are always really great messages. I'm glad when anybody tells me that, and it's really an honor.
Yeah, right, and it's really informative, even for us that belong to the field. The other day, my co-advisor, my former PhD co-advisor, Eduardo Shoa, he shared one of your posts. It was about a paper from the 60s on the art of mathematical modeling. It was so ahead of its time. It brings a very nice discussion, even the philosophical aspect of modeling and so on. And it's great. So it serves not only for those that are not from the field, but also, of course, those that are operations researchers. So I can confirm that it's really a really good initiative, and it's wonderful. And I would like to congratulate you for that project. That is just amazing.
Thank you.
Right. Can you please tell me now about your research work on emergency medical services, cybersecurity, and maybe other society relevant problems that you like to refer to?
Yeah, so I've started branching out into different application areas on the tenure track. So in my first year, I was partnered with Fire and Emergency Medical Department they had some problems to solve. They didn't know how to get there. Their medical director, who's an emergency medical physician, was really ambitious with what they could do in a budget-constrained environment with interdependent decisions. And the chief there was really willing to think outside the box and provided some ideas, like maybe we should have these non-transport vehicles, which are basically SUVs that can respond to patients, and then they can be freed up more easily. And so it was really a great environment where they had some needs for me to analyze their data and point things out, but then also to think about how they could design a better system. And so that really started a long partnership. I partnered with other agencies since then, but just trying to re-envision what emergency medical services can do. And I've written many papers in the area. My most recent one was accepted for publication this past month, but really trying to the technical basis of kind of designing more better systems. A lot of my research is focused on making more patient-centered decisions and bringing that kind of healthcare ideas into emergency response and emergency medical services, because they are trying to save lives and to make a difference. And when they have all these different vehicles that they can respond to, you can't just evaluate their service in terms of how fast they got there. you actually have to look at the quality of the care. And so my research has tried to delve into those topics and from a few different angles over the past 15 years or so. And then, I try to envision applying operations research in other areas. So I started working in cybersecurity about 7 years ago, and it was really got introduced to somebody that I knew that was using data analytics in cybersecurity from like a risk management point of view, dealing with supply chain security. Because you have to protect the system and the infrastructure, but then you have to also protect the supply chain that can introduce all these other risks to the system. And just coming up with more structured ways to look at it. And OR is really, really great at that. And it's still a fascinating problem. I'm doing a lot of research in that area right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the policies at the time were just really overly simplistic, and they really didn't do anything to reduce the risk. And so that's why we were trying to introduce better ways of studying the issue. And now I'm looking at like, how do you get the right timing for the decision, and how do you roll out security measures instead of just viewing them as a binary decision. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answers yet. I've got my work cut out for me, but it's really fun to work on.
Yeah, that's the important thing. I mean, it's not only fascinating, as you said, but also you're enjoying what you're doing, and that message is really encouraging and motivating. We were mentioning just now that OR can be seen somewhat as a secret society. Do you think that after so many years of a massive amount of research in our field, OR is still an obscure subject for the society in general, worldwide?
Yeah, sadly, I think it is a bit of a well-kept secret. I'm doing my best to change that. We have so many great stories to tell. And if you look at what really matters for decision making in the world, data analytics, but that's not really nearly enough. You need a lot of math, and you look at the type of interdependent decisions that need to be made to really, run large enterprises. We also use a lot of math models. Math models are really critical for understanding our world. I keep seeing all these forecasting models for COVID, and it's based on the probability models that I teach in my course that I teach every year. In fact, we've introduced epidemiological models like the SIR models, and they're really critical for understanding our world, right? We're actually seeing them in the newspaper every day.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that we have really important tools that really make a difference. And if you look at what we've done in healthcare, which has really grown across, during my career, that we have tools, they're really useful. They really work super well in the healthcare settings, so you can actually apply them. And we're not limited to just healthcare, but there's going to be other applications that we also can grow into, and you can see that happening with transportation and the sharing economy and all the next generation transportation decisions. That our tools are really useful.
Yeah. Perhaps we have to improve our marketing skills. On that matter, do you see yourself as an influencer? Because you have more than 5,000 followers on Twitter, and that is quite a lot for someone from OR.
Well, if you're going to label me as an operations researcher, influencer, I'll take it. I just think we all need to do our part so that OR isn't such a well-kept secret. I'm happy to do it. It's really nice. I really like talking to the general public about math and math modeling and data analytics and moving from data to decisions. People get really excited when they hear about what we can do. So I think there's a lot more we could do if we wanted to. When I was at Informs, I was the vice president of marketing, communication, and outreach, and I helped lead some of the advocacy efforts, which is about collaborating with government policymakers and turning our models and our insights into policy to save lives and to make a difference. And that was really fulfilling. And it was really fun to talk to congressional staff and Senate staff about some of the problems they were dealing with and some of the insights that you could get from our models. So there's really a wide scope of influence that we can have to help solve real problems.
Right. We have to talk about women in OR, of course. Mm-hmm. You were a role model, of course. We were just discussing that you were an inspiration for marketing and other stuff regarding social networks and the fact that you were an influencer in our field. But how do you see the situation in terms of gender and the amount of women that are working in our field. The numbers, the figures are not really encouraging. I think there's still a huge gap when you see the number of men and then the number of women in our field. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And when I talk about the long way to go, of course, we can make improvements for women, but it's also, diversity comes in a lot of different flavors. There's other dimensions, race, ability, status, culture. Those are just a few of them. We have to make our field more welcoming. Whenever we've been able to do that, and we've been able to broaden who participates in operations research, the field gets so much better. We start studying new applications. We start looking at the old applications and our old tools, but in better ways, where we're asking different questions that really enrich what we're doing. It's just so good for the health of the field. So there's a lot to do. I spend a lot of time just trying to welcome everybody in. And when we do that, we ourselves are going to change. It's not just a one-way street of assimilation. And I mentioned the impact that can have on the field. But I've revisited how to train students in certain ways, how I teach, and I'm constantly reassessing and improving and doing better. And I try to take advantage of any advantage I can to reach out to people younger in the field to mentor them. And that goes from high school students that are considering OR potentially. And if they go into another engineering field, that's great. I count that as a win. And then make sure that they stay and succeed, on to graduate students, which is a passion of mine, and then also early career faculty members in operations research. So I actually ran a mentoring program this past year. I think it's so critical. And I do think that, women, especially women that are younger in the field with young children, this is a really tough time for our field. And there are many of those women are departing because we just don't have enough societal supports in place to have a career, any type of career really, during the pandemic without reliable childcare. So we have a lot of work to do. I remain optimistic about the future. The pandemic has uncovered some of the challenges that we have, and they were there all along, but it's made me realize that we still have to work quite hard at what we do.
Yeah. I had this student, and she's very good in math, and she's now about to start an engineering course, and she told me that her family was always discouraging her to do engineering or physics or math or any career related to science. They're telling her to do law or something like that. They say, no, engineering, it's not a field for women. I found that really inappropriate. So what is the role of family in this context? What are your views on this?
Yeah, it can be really hard. And I've talked to graduate students that have had various levels of support and lack of support. And it's important for us in the community to help provide other levels of support if they can't rely on the family. My parents always were very supportive. They were really only supportive of me going to graduate school because I got a stipend and paid for it myself. So that's a piece of it too. For a lot of family members is the cost of higher education and looking at that. But it is tricky if there's not a lot of support at home. And I think that's why these organizations, from Informs to things at our university, can really help fill in some of the gaps and provide role models and provide a path, because sometimes they need to find that path. And once they find it, it's easier to stay on it.
Yeah. Finally, there's this paper that recently came out, and it was published in Service Science, and it's entitled "Who Are the Gatekeepers? An Examination of Diversity in Inform's Journal Editorial Boards." The numbers are really, not favorable to women, and also the authors pointed out that a large number of the members of those boards belong to a very limited number of universities. I know you already made some comments on social media and so on, but can you elaborate more on this, please?
Sure, and the paper's by Margaret Brando at Stanford. Am I correct?
I think so. I have to double check, but I think yes.
Okay, I think yes too. Yeah, we have to be very mindful of this. because we're not going to just by default pick very diverse sets of people to be gatekeepers. And it's really critical for journals because that's like the currency when you go up for tenure is paper publications. And, really when you're looking at papers getting published, you have to think about, is this research valuable? And who gets to decide, you know, what good research is and what do they look like, right? So we have to think about those things. And we have all sorts of implicit biases and social networks that aren't like fully connected like they should be. And we're human, so we're not going to maybe get it right all the time. So we have to be very mindful of this. And I'm really glad that Margaret did that work to shine a light on the problem, and maybe now that opens up avenues to fix it. I try to do my part, and I'm not perfect, and I've got a ways to go, but I've been very mindful of those issues in my editorial boards. I'm a department editor for IC Transactions, so that's the only one where I get to pick associate editors, and I've had 6 over the years, and 3 have been women, and 2 are underrepresented. 2 have been underrepresented minorities, and so I've been trying to do my part to make sure there's a diversity of viewpoints on those journals, but really they're highly qualified, and I think that's worth pointing out too. And to really publish the best research, you have to have really great researchers, and if they're a little bit different, that's great because they have different strengths, and they look for different things in papers, and then you can make sure that you're consistently publishing high quality work.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Well, Laura, I don't know how to thank you, not only for this wonderful time I just had talking to you, but also for everything you've done for our field, trying to put us in the map and having this resilience, to keep on working. Also, the inspiration that you are for women, So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's hope all this pandemic crisis gets, solved pretty soon, and we're able to maybe one day meet in person.
I'd like that.
Right. All the best. Bye. Ciao.
Okay.